Mother Bear saw alone. Baby on the tower, what she did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. The mist hung heavy over Pine Valley Forest as the first light of dawn broke through the trees. Olivia Chen had been hiking since sunrise, her camera ready to capture the beauty of nature. The forest was unusually quiet that morning, almost as if it was holding its breath. As she walked deeper into the woods, she noticed an ancient stone watchtower rising above the canopy, its weathered exterior nearly swallowed by climbing vines. Olivia adjusted her backpack and moved closer to the crumbling structure. The tower must have been centuries old, a forgotten relic of some long-ago need for vigilance. As she approached, a strange sound carried on the wind, faint at first, then unmistakable. A baby's cry. Olivia froze. It couldn't be. Not here, miles from any town or village. She tilted her head, listening carefully. The crying came again, louder this time, echoing from high above. Olivia's eyes traveled up the stone walls of the tower, and what she saw made her blood run cold. There, on a narrow ledge near the top, was a small bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. "Hello?" Olivia called out, her voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" Only the baby's cries answered her. Her heart pounding, Olivia circled the tower looking for a way in. The wooden door at the base was rotted through, but the interior staircase had long since collapsed. There was no way to climb it safely. She pulled out her phone. No signal. The nearest ranger station was at least 2 hours away by foot. "Hold on, little one," she whispered, though she knew the baby couldn't hear her. "I'll find help." Just then, a movement in the undergrowth caught her attention. Olivia turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat, as a massive brown bear emerged from between the trees. The bear stood on all fours, her fur gleaming in the dappled light, her dark eyes fixed not on Olivia, but on the tower. Olivia stood perfectly still, fear paralyzing her limbs. The mother bear, and Olivia could tell it was a mother from her size and the way she moved, seemed to be listening to the baby's cries. The animal lifted her head, sniffing the air, then rose onto her hind legs, reaching nearly 7 feet tall. Her eyes remained locked on the ledge where the infant lay. The baby wailed again, the sound piercing the morning stillness. The mother bear dropped back to all fours and began to circle the tower, much as Olivia had done moments before. She examined the crumbling base, nudging stones with her powerful snout. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and the distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. A storm was coming. Olivia's worry deepened. Not only was there a baby stranded on the tower, but now rain would make everything even more dangerous. And the bear, what would the bear do? To Olivia's astonishment, the mother bear began to climb. Using her powerful claws, she found purchase in the cracks between stones, pulling herself upward with determined strength. Loose rocks tumbled down as she climbed, but the bear continued her ascent, moving with surprising grace for a creature so large. "What are you doing?" Olivia whispered, unable to believe what she was seeing. Was the bear hunting? No. The focused, deliberate way the animal moved suggested something else entirely. The baby's cries grew more intense as the bear climbed higher. Olivia reached for her camera with shaking hands and began to record. No one would believe this without proof. Thunder cracked overhead, closer now, and the first heavy raindrops began to fall. The bear paused briefly, looking up at the darkening sky, then continued her climb with renewed urgency. In the distance, Olivia heard another sound that made her heart sink, the howl of wolves. The storm and the baby's cries must have drawn them. The mother bear seemed to hear them too, her movements becoming more determined as she neared the ledge where the infant lay. Olivia held her breath as the bear reached the ledge. What happened next would stay with her forever. The mother bear approached the bundled infant with surprising gentleness. She lowered her massive head, her wet nose just inches from the baby's face. Olivia's finger hovered over her phone, ready to call emergency services the moment she had signal, certain she was about to witness a tragedy. But instead of aggression, the bear showed an almost tender curiosity. She sniffed the baby carefully, then used her snout to nudge the blanket, revealing more of the infant's tiny face. The baby's cries softened momentarily as the bear's warm breath washed over its skin. Then, as if recognizing something in the animal's presence, the infant reached up with a tiny hand. Olivia gasped as those miniature fingers brushed against the bear's fur. "This can't be happening," Olivia whispered, rain now streaming down her face as she continued to record. The mother bear made a low, rumbling sound. Not a growl of threat, but something softer, almost like a purr. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed instantly by a deafening crack of thunder. The tower trembled, and pieces of ancient mortar crumbled away. The bear's head snapped up, alert to the danger. The ledge where the baby lay shifted slightly, dropping a few inches. The infant began to wail again, louder than before, tiny arms flailing in fear. Without hesitation, the mother bear moved closer, positioning her body around the baby like a living shield. More stones fell away as the ledge continued to crumble. In a moment of incredible instinct, the bear gently took the edge of the baby's blanket between her teeth and pulled the bundle closer to her chest, away from the ledge's edge. Another rumble shook the forest, but this time it wasn't thunder. Part of the tower's upper section was collapsing. Olivia screamed a warning, though she knew neither the bear nor the baby could understand. Rain poured down in sheets now, making the stones slick and treacherous. The wolf howls grew closer. Olivia spotted movement at the forest's edge. 3 gray wolves had emerged, drawn by the baby's cries and perhaps the scent of the bear. They circled the base of the tower, looking up, waiting for an opportunity. "No, no, no," Olivia murmured, her camera still recording as she backed toward a large tree for shelter. She watched in horror as more of the ledge gave way. The bear reacted instantly, wrapping her foreleg around the baby bundle and pulling it tightly against her chest. With her other 3 limbs, she clung desperately to what remained of the sturdy stonework. The mother bear was now dangling precariously, holding onto the tower with 3 limbs while clutching the baby with her 4th. The wolves below circled more eagerly, sensing the possibility of prey falling directly to them. A flash of headlights cut through the rain-soaked gloom. A forestry service truck bumped along the barely visible track that led to the tower. Olivia had never been so grateful to see another human being. She ran toward the vehicle, waving her arms frantically. The truck stopped, and a tall man in a rain-slicked jacket jumped out, followed by a younger woman in a similar uniform. "Help!" Olivia screamed over the storm. "There's a baby up there, and a bear. It's trying to save it." "What?" The man squinted through the rain at her, clearly thinking he'd misheard. "Look!" Olivia pointed up at the tower. "The bear is protecting a baby." The 2 forest rangers followed her gaze. The man, whose jacket identified him as Ranger Marcus Reed, grabbed binoculars from the truck and focused them upward. His expression changed from skepticism to shock. "Dear God," he breathed. "Sarah, radio for backup and medical support. Now." The younger ranger ran back to the truck while Marcus turned to Olivia. "How long has the bear been up there with the baby?" "I don't know," Olivia said, showing him the video on her camera. "I found them maybe 20 minutes ago. The bear climbed up there on its own. It's trying to protect the baby, I'm sure of it. Marcus watched a few seconds of the footage, his face a mixture of disbelief and awe. In 20 years as a ranger, I've never seen anything like this. The tower shuddered again, and more stones fell away. The bear was losing her grip. The baby clutched tightly to her chest. The wolves below grew more excited, darting closer to the tower's base. "The wolves," Olivia said urgently. "They're waiting for them to fall." Marcus nodded grimly. He reached into the truck and pulled out a rifle. "I won't harm the bear unless I absolutely have to," he assured Olivia. "But those wolves aren't getting that baby." Sarah returned, her face grim. "Backup is at least 30 minutes out. The storm has blocked the main road with a fallen tree." "That baby doesn't have 30 minutes, Marcus said. He looked up at the crumbling tower, then at the circling wolves. "I'm going to try to scare off the wolves and then see if we can get up there somehow." He fired a warning shot into the air. The wolves scattered momentarily but didn't retreat into the forest. They were too fixated on their potential prey. "We need to try something else," Marcus said. He looked at the tower thoughtfully. There used to be an interior staircase, but it collapsed years ago. However, there might be enough of the structure left to climb. "You can't go up there," Sarah protested. "The whole thing could come down any minute." "We don't have a choice," Marcus replied. He turned to Olivia. "Keep filming. Whatever happens, people need to see this." Marcus approached the tower cautiously, the rifle slung over his shoulder. The wolves growled as he passed, but the warning shot had made them wary. He found the rotted wooden door and kicked it open wider, peering into the darkness inside. "There's enough of the staircase left to maybe get part way up," he called back. "I'm going to try." Before he could enter, a sharp crack split the air. More of the ledge where the bear clung gave way. The mother bear made a desperate lunge, her powerful legs finding a new hold on the stonework. But in the process, her grip on the baby slipped. For a heart-stopping moment, the bundled infant fell through the air. Olivia screamed, Sarah gasped, and Marcus lunged forward uselessly. But the mother bear made an impossible move, twisting her body and catching the bundle with her teeth, the blanket held securely but gently in her jaws. The baby dangled from the bear's mouth, no longer crying, but silent in what must have been shock. The mother bear, now in an even more precarious position, somehow began to maneuver downward, finding footholds in the crumbling tower wall. "She's climbing down," Sarah whispered in amazement. "She's actually trying to bring the baby down." The wolves sensed the bear's vulnerability and grew bolder, moving closer to the tower base. Marcus raised his rifle again, firing another warning shot closer to the pack. This time, 2 of the wolves retreated a few yards, but the largest one, clearly the alpha, held its ground, eyes fixed on the descending bear. Inch by inch, the mother bear worked her way down, the baby dangling from her jaws. Each time her paw dislodged a stone, Olivia's heart seemed to stop, but somehow the bear maintained her balance and her gentle grip on the infant. Halfway down the tower, disaster struck. A large section of the wall suddenly gave way beneath the bear's weight. With a roar muffled by the bundle in her mouth, the mother bear tumbled through the air. Somehow, in those split seconds of falling, she twisted her massive body, curling protectively around the baby as they crashed to the ground. Marcus and Sarah rushed forward. The alpha wolf, seeing his opportunity, also lunged toward the fallen bear and baby. Without hesitation, Marcus fired a shot that hit the ground just in front of the wolf, forcing it to leap back. Sarah unholstered a can of bear spray, ready to use it if necessary. But the mother bear, though clearly injured from the fall, was already struggling to her feet. She had landed on her side and back, taking the brunt of the impact. The baby still clutched safely against her chest. She opened her mouth, releasing her gentle hold on the blanket, and nudged the bundle with her nose. To everyone's astonishment, a small cry emerged from the bundle. The baby was alive. The mother bear looked up at the humans approaching her, her eyes showing pain and wariness, but not aggression. Blood matted the fur on her side where she'd hit the ground hardest. "Easy," Marcus said softly, lowering his rifle. "Easy, Mama. You did good." The bear made no move to attack or flee. Instead, she continued to nudge the baby with her nose, as if checking that it was unharmed. Then, to the human's amazement, she used her snout to push the bundle toward them, across the wet ground. Sarah knelt and carefully picked up the baby, unwrapping the soaked blanket enough to check the infant's condition. It was a boy, perhaps 6 months old, with a shock of dark hair. Apart from being cold and frightened, he appeared remarkably unharmed. "He's okay," Sarah announced, her voice breaking with emotion. "I can't believe it, but he's okay." The mother bear watched this exchange, her intelligent eyes never leaving the baby. Then, her mission seemingly complete, she began to limp toward the forest. The remaining wolves had retreated to the tree line, intimidated by the gunshots and the humans. "Wait," Olivia called out, her camera still recording. "She's hurt. Can we help her?" Marcus shook his head sadly. Wild animals rarely accept human help, especially bears. "The best thing we can do is let her go and get this baby medical attention." The mother bear paused at the forest's edge, looking back at the humans and the baby one last time. Then, with a dignified slowness, she disappeared into the trees just as the rain began to ease. By now, more headlights were visible on the forest track. The backup Marcus had called for was finally arriving. As a paramedic rushed toward them to check on the baby, Olivia looked down at her camera, making sure she had captured everything. "No one will ever believe this without proof," she said, her voice still shaky. Marcus nodded, his eyes moist as he watched Sarah gently rock the rescued infant. "In all my years in these woods, I've seen bears do many things, but nothing like this. It's like she knew, like she understood that baby needed help." "She sacrificed herself," Sarah added softly. "She could have been killed in that fall, but she made sure to protect the baby instead of herself." The paramedic examined the infant, wrapping him in warm, dry blankets. "He's in surprisingly good condition. Cold and frightened, but no obvious injuries. It's a miracle." "No," Olivia said, looking toward the forest where the bear had disappeared. "It wasn't a miracle. It was a mother's instinct. That bear understood one thing perfectly. A baby needed protection, and nothing else mattered." As word spread about what had happened at the old tower, more people arrived. Police officers, medical personnel, and curious locals gathered around, all wanting to see the baby that had been saved by a bear. Olivia showed her video to the police, who were investigating how the infant had ended up on the tower in the first place. Detective Nathan Winters watched the footage with an expression of disbelief. "I've been on the force for 16 years, and I've never seen anything like this," he said, shaking his head. "If I hadn't seen this video, I wouldn't have believed it." The story began to piece together as the day progressed. The baby was identified as Samuel Fisher, the son of the hikers who had been reported missing 2 days earlier. The parents, Thomas and Rebecca Fisher, had apparently gone exploring in the forest with their infant and hadn't returned. Search parties had been looking for them since yesterday. "We need to find the parents," Detective Winters said grimly. "The fact that the baby was alone on that tower, it doesn't look good." Marcus offered to lead a search party into the woods surrounding the tower. If the mother bear found the baby, she might have encountered the parents too. As the rescuers organized themselves, Olivia couldn't stop thinking about the injured bear. She saved that baby's life and now she's out there, hurt and alone, she said to Sarah, who was helping load equipment into the Forestry Service trucks. Sarah nodded, her expression troubled. Bears are remarkably resilient, but that fall was bad. I'm worried about her too. I'm going to look for her, Olivia decided. I can't just leave knowing she's injured. That's not a good idea, Sarah warned. She may be more aggressive now that she's hurt. But Olivia was determined. She wasn't aggressive when she was protecting that baby. I don't think she'll hurt me. I just want to make sure she's okay. Before Sarah could protest further, Marcus approached them. We found something, he said quietly, about half a mile from here. You should come see. His somber tone told them it wasn't good news. They followed him along a narrow forest trail that wound away from the tower. The rain had stopped completely now, but the forest was still dripping, the ground muddy and slick. After walking for about 10 minutes, they came to a small clearing. 2 bodies lay on the ground, covered with emergency blankets. Several police officers stood nearby, their faces grim. Thomas and Rebecca Fisher, Detective Winters confirmed. It looks like they were attacked by something, probably the wolves. They have defensive wounds on their hands and arms. They were trying to protect their baby, Sarah said softly. Detective Winters nodded. Based on what we can piece together, they must have climbed the tower to escape the wolves, taking their baby with them. But the tower was unstable. And they fell, Marcus finished. But somehow the baby ended up on that ledge, protected from the wolves, but stranded. For 2 days, Olivia whispered, her heart breaking for the infant who had lost his parents and yet survived against impossible odds. That poor baby was alone up there for 2 days. As they stood in silent mourning for the tragic loss of the young parents, a rustling sound came from the underbrush nearby. Everyone tensed, the police officers reaching for their weapons. From between the trees emerged the mother bear, still limping badly, her fur matted with blood and mud. But she wasn't alone. At her side walked 2 small bear cubs, staying close to their mother's injured flank. Her cubs, Sarah breathed. That's why she understood. She's a mother, too. The mother bear paused at the edge of the clearing, her dark eyes taking in the humans and what lay beneath the emergency blankets. For a long moment, she stood watching them, her cubs huddled against her. Then, with a soft grunt to her young ones, she turned and led them deeper into the forest. She came to say goodbye, Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. She knew what happened here. Marcus nodded, too moved to speak. Detective Winters, usually stoic in the face of tragedy, wiped his eyes quickly. What will happen to the baby now? Sarah asked. Samuel? Social services will try to find next of kin, Detective Winters replied. If there's no family that can take him, he'll enter the foster system. Olivia thought about the mother bear, injured but still caring for her cubs. She thought about baby Samuel, who had lost everything but had been saved by the most unlikely guardian. And suddenly, she knew what she had to do. I want to apply to foster him, she said firmly, at least until family can be found. He's been through so much already. He shouldn't be with strangers. Detective Winters looked at her skeptically. That's not how the system usually works, Miss Chen. I'm a certified foster parent, Olivia explained. I've fostered 3 children in the past. I have all the documentation. Please, at least consider it. I was there. I saw what happened. There's a connection. The detective's expression softened. I'll put in a word with social services. I can't promise anything, but I'll try." As they made their way back to the tower site, where ambulances and police cars now crowded the small clearing, Olivia's mind was made up. She would do whatever it took to make sure Samuel was cared for. If she couldn't foster him herself, she would make sure whoever did knew the incredible story of how he survived, of the mother bear who had recognized a baby in need and had risked everything to save him. At the site, the paramedics were preparing to transport Samuel to the hospital for a thorough examination. Olivia approached and asked if she could see him one last time before they left. The paramedic nodded, allowing her to peer into the ambulance where the baby lay, wrapped in warm blankets, his eyes wide open now, looking up at her. "Hey, Samuel," Olivia said softly. "You're the bravest little boy I've ever met. And you had the bravest protector, too." As if he understood, Samuel reached up with his tiny hand, just as he had reached for the mother bear on that tower ledge. Olivia gently touched his fingers with her own, making a silent promise that his story, and the story of the mother bear who saved him, would never be forgotten. The paramedic closed the ambulance doors and Olivia stepped back, watching as it drove away. Sarah came to stand beside her, both of them emotional from the day's events. "What that bear did," Sarah said quietly, "it goes against everything we understand about wild animal behavior." Olivia nodded. "Maybe we don't understand as much as we think we do. Maybe there are connections between living things that go deeper than we can explain." As the storm clouds finally parted and weak sunshine filtered through the trees, Olivia looked toward the forest where the mother bear and her cubs had disappeared. She knew that what she had witnessed would stay with her forever, a reminder that compassion could appear in the most unexpected moments and from the most unexpected hearts. News of the remarkable rescue spread quickly. By evening, Olivia's video had been shared thousands of times online. People around the world watched in awe as the mother bear climbed the tower, rescued the baby, and sacrificed her own safety to protect the tiny human life. Wildlife experts were interviewed on national news programs, most of them struggling to explain the bear's behavior in scientific terms. Some suggested it was a case of misdirected maternal instinct, while others proposed that bears might be more cognitively complex than previously understood. But the public didn't need scientific explanations. They saw in the mother bear's actions something profoundly moving, a universal understanding of what it meant to protect the vulnerable. 3 days later, Olivia received a call from social services. Due to the extraordinary circumstances and her connection to the case, they were expediting her application to temporarily foster Samuel. There was distant family, an aunt in Colorado, but it would take time to arrange the transfer of guardianship. In the meantime, they believed Samuel would benefit from being with someone who understood what he had experienced. The day Olivia brought Samuel home, a small crowd of well-wishers gathered outside her apartment building. The story had touched so many hearts, and people wanted to offer support: baby clothes, toys, and other necessities. Olivia was overwhelmed by the outpouring of kindness. As she settled into a routine with Samuel, Olivia couldn't stop thinking about the mother bear. Had she survived her injuries? Were her cubs thriving? She contacted Marcus, who promised to keep an eye out for them during his patrols of the forest. A week passed, then 2. Samuel was adjusting well, though sometimes in the night he would wake crying, reaching upward as if searching for something. In those moments, Olivia would hold him close and whisper, "You're safe now. You're so loved." Then, on a crisp morning 3 weeks after the rescue, Marcus called. "We've spotted her," he said, his voice excited. "The mother bear. She's alive, Olivia. Her injuries seem to be healing, and her cubs are with her. We've set up a protected area around their territory. No hunting, no hiking, just peace and quiet for them to recover." Tears of relief filled Olivia's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for telling me." When Samuel's aunt finally arrived from Colorado, it was both a happy and sad day for Olivia. She knew the baby belonged with family, but in the short time they'd spent together, she had grown to love him deeply. Linda Fisher, the aunt, was a kind woman who listened intently as Olivia shared the full story of her nephew's miraculous rescue. "I've seen the video," Linda said, cradling Samuel in her arms. But hearing it from someone who was there, it's still hard to believe. "I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes," Olivia admitted. "But I did see it, and I'll never forget it." "I don't know how to thank that bear," Linda said, her voice breaking. "She saved all I have left of my brother and his wife." Olivia thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe we don't need to thank her. Maybe we just need to remember what she showed us, that sometimes caring for each other crosses every boundary we think exists." Before Linda took Samuel back to Colorado, they visited the tower one last time. The crumbling structure had been cordoned off now, deemed too dangerous for visitors. But at its base, people had created an impromptu memorial. Flowers, stuffed bears, and handwritten notes expressing gratitude and wonder at what had happened there. Olivia held Samuel up so he could see. He was too young to understand, of course, but someday he would. Someday he would know the extraordinary story of how he survived, of the mother bear who had seen a baby in need and had acted with a compassion that moved the world to tears. As they turned to leave, Olivia caught a glimpse of movement in the distant trees. She couldn't be sure, but she thought she saw a large brown shape watching them, two smaller shapes at its side. She smiled and raised her hand in a gesture of farewell and gratitude. "Look, Samuel," she whispered, though the baby was too young to understand. "Your guardian angel is saying goodbye." Linda followed her gaze and gasped softly. "Is that her? The bear?" Olivia nodded. "And her cubs. She's been watching over him still." For a moment, the mother bear stood perfectly still, her dark eyes reflecting the afternoon sunlight. Then she made a soft huffing sound to her cubs, and the three of them melted back into the forest shadows. Some connections, Olivia knew, transcended words. Some stories changed the way we saw the world. And the story of the mother bear and baby Samuel was one that would be told for generations to come. A reminder of the unexpected bonds that could form between the most unlikely hearts and the universal language of compassion that all living creatures somehow understood. 6 months passed. Autumn turned to winter, and winter slowly yielded to spring. Olivia had returned to her work as a wildlife photographer, but her experiences in Pine Valley Forest had changed her profoundly. She found herself drawn back to the area regularly, both to visit Samuel and his Aunt Linda, who had decided to relocate permanently to a small house on the edge of the forest, and to check on the mother bear and her growing cubs. The tower had been declared a historical site now, with plans to stabilize the structure rather than demolish it. A tasteful bronze plaque had been installed at its base, commemorating the extraordinary rescue that had taken place there. "Where compassion crossed boundaries," it read simply, alongside an artistic rendering of a mother bear cradling a human infant. Olivia's video had done more than just capture a moment of interspecies connection. It had sparked a movement. Donations had poured in from around the world, leading to the establishment of the Samuel Fisher Wildlife Sanctuary, a 500-acre protected area surrounding the tower and extending deep into the forest. Within this sanctuary, the mother bear, now affectionately known to the public as Guardian, and her cubs could live undisturbed. Marcus Reed had been appointed the head ranger of the new sanctuary, a position he accepted with pride and a deep sense of responsibility. He had established observation posts at strategic locations around the sanctuary's perimeter, allowing researchers to study Guardian and her cubs from a respectful distance. "She's become a legend," Marcus told Olivia during one of her visits. They were standing on a newly built observation platform, binoculars trained on a sun-dappled clearing where Guardian and her cubs were foraging for early spring berries. Some of the old-timers in the area say they've always known bears were special, but no one could have imagined this. "How is she doing?" Olivia asked, adjusting her camera to capture a few distant shots. "Remarkably well," Marcus replied. "The injury from the fall healed completely. Her cubs are thriving. They're almost adolescents now. And the strangest thing is, she seems to know she's protected here. She's more relaxed around the edges of human activity than any wild bear I've ever observed." Olivia smiled. She knows she's safe. She can sense it. As they watched, one of Guardian's cubs playfully batted at a butterfly, rising onto its hind legs to reach the fluttering insect. The movement was so reminiscent of how Guardian had stretched toward baby Samuel on the tower that Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes. "I'm heading over to Linda's place this afternoon," she said, lowering her camera. "Would you like to come?" Samuel is walking now. Well, more like running, actually. He's growing so fast. Marcus's face softened. He had become nearly as attached to Samuel's story as Olivia had. "I'd like that. It's been a few weeks since I've seen the little guy." Later that day, as Olivia's car wound along the forest road toward Linda's cottage, she noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The spring weather in Pine Valley was notoriously unpredictable, with sudden storms rolling in from the mountains without warning. "Looks like we might get some rain," she commented to Marcus, who was checking weather alerts on his phone. "More than rain," he replied grimly. "There's a severe thunderstorm warning for the entire county. High winds, possible flash flooding in the lower areas." Olivia accelerated slightly, wanting to reach Linda's cottage before the worst of the weather hit. As they pulled into the gravel driveway, Linda came out onto the porch. Samuel balanced on her hip. At 18 months old, he was a sturdy toddler with a shock of dark hair and bright, curious eyes. "I was hoping you'd get here before the storm," Linda called, ushering them inside as the first fat raindrops began to fall. "The weather service says it's going to be a bad one." Samuel squealed with delight when he saw Olivia, reaching for her with eager hands. She took him into her arms, marveling as always at how much he'd grown. He had no memory, of course, of the bear who had saved him or the parents he had lost, but Linda kept photographs of Thomas and Rebecca Fisher prominently displayed throughout the cottage, determined that her nephew would grow up knowing their faces and hearing their stories. "Any news from the sanctuary?" Linda asked, preparing coffee as the thunder rumbled in the distance. Marcus nodded. "Guardian and her cubs are doing well. We've been documenting their movements, and they seem to be establishing a larger territory within the protected area." Linda smiled. "I still can't believe I'm on a first-name basis with a bear." Her expression grew more serious. "Samuel and I visited the memorial yesterday. Someone had left a beautiful hand-carved wooden bear. People are still so moved by what happened." The storm intensified as they talked, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling through the trees surrounding the cottage. Samuel, excited by the dramatic weather, toddled from window to window, pointing at the lightning and attempting to mimic the thunder with his own little growls. "He's fearless," Linda said proudly. "The pediatrician says he's developing ahead of schedule in almost every area." "After what he survived as an infant, I'm not surprised," Marcus commented. "He's a special child." As evening approached, the storm showed no signs of abating. In fact, it seemed to be growing stronger, the wind now strong enough to bend the smaller trees visible from the cottage windows. Marcus's phone buzzed with an alert. His expression grew concerned as he read the message. "Flash flood warning for the entire area," he said. "The river that runs through the lower section of the sanctuary is already rising rapidly." "Will the wildlife be okay?" Olivia asked, worry creasing her brow. "Most of the animals should instinctively move to higher ground," Marcus assured her, "including Guardian and her cubs. Their usual territory is well above the floodplain." Just then, the cottage's lights flickered and went out. Linda sighed. "Power outages are common up here during storms. I have plenty of candles and a generator for essentials." She moved efficiently around the cottage, lighting candles and checking that the generator was functioning properly. Samuel, unfazed by the darkness, continued his excited exploration of the storm, pressing his small hands against the window glass as lightning illuminated the night sky. Olivia joined him at the window, lifting him into her arms for a better view. "Look at that, Samuel," she said softly. "Nature's power show, just for you." As another flash of lightning lit up the forest, Olivia froze. There, at the edge of the clearing around Linda's cottage, stood a familiar silhouette. Large, four-legged, unmistakable. Guardian. And she was alone, without her cubs. "Marcus," Olivia called urgently. "Come look at this." Marcus joined them at the window, squinting into the darkness. When the next lightning flash came, he saw what Olivia had seen. His brow furrowed in concern. "Something's wrong," he said quietly. "She shouldn't be this close to human habitation, and she never leaves her cubs alone, especially not in a storm like this." Guardian took a few steps forward, then stopped, looking directly at the cottage as if she could see through the walls to the humans inside. Then she turned and moved a few paces back toward the forest before stopping again and looking over her shoulder. "She wants us to follow her," Olivia said, the realization hitting her with absolute certainty. "She's trying to show us something." Marcus looked skeptical. "That's a huge assumption, Olivia. Wild animals don't—" "This isn't just any wild animal," Olivia interrupted. "This is Guardian. She saved Samuel when no human could. She's trying to communicate." Linda had joined them at the window now. "I think Olivia's right," she said softly. "Look at her behavior. It's deliberate." Another lightning flash revealed Guardian still waiting at the forest edge, her massive head turned toward the cottage. When the thunder that followed subsided, they could hear her, a deep, rumbling call that seemed to cut through the storm noise. Marcus's expression shifted from skepticism to concern. "If you're right, and she is trying to get our attention, it must be serious. Maybe her cubs are in trouble." "We have to help her," Olivia said firmly. "After what she did for Samuel, how can we not?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll go. I have emergency gear in my truck, and I know these forests better than anyone." "I'm coming with you," Olivia insisted. "Guardian knows me. She might be more likely to lead me where she wants us to go." Linda looked alarmed. "You can't go out in this storm. It's too dangerous." "We have to," Olivia said, setting Samuel down gently. "Guardian wouldn't come here, to a human dwelling, unless something was terribly wrong." Marcus was already pulling on his rain gear. "Linda, can you call the sanctuary office? Tell them what's happening, and that we're heading into the forest from your location. If we're not back or haven't made contact in 2 hours, they should send a search team." Linda nodded reluctantly, picking up Samuel, who had begun to sense the adult's tension and was growing fretful. "Please be careful," she said. "Samuel needs his godmother to come back safe." Olivia quickly donned a raincoat Linda lent her, and Marcus handed her a powerful flashlight from his emergency kit. Together, they stepped out into the howling storm. Rain immediately drenched them despite their protective clothing, and the wind nearly knocked Olivia off her feet. Guardian was still waiting at the forest's edge. As their flashlight beams found her, she turned and began to move into the trees, pausing to make sure they were following. "This is crazy," Marcus shouted over the storm as they plunged into the forest after the bear. "But I've learned not to underestimate that animal." The forest was a chaos of motion and sound. Branches whipping in the wind, rain pounding against leaves, the occasional crash of a falling limb. Their flashlights created eerie tunnels of visibility in the darkness, catching Guardian's wet fur as she moved ahead of them, always maintaining the same distance, always looking back to ensure they followed. They had been walking for about 20 minutes, climbing steadily uphill away from the flood-prone areas, when Guardian's path suddenly veered toward the sound of rushing water. Marcus grabbed Olivia's arm, pulling her to a stop. "That's Pine Creek ahead," he shouted over the storm noise. "It's usually just a small stream, but in a flood like this it could be a raging torrent. We need to be extremely careful." They proceeded more cautiously, and soon the beam of their flashlights revealed what had once been a gentle forest stream. Now it was a churning, muddy river, at least 20 feet across and rising visibly as they watched. Guardian had stopped at the creek's edge. She turned to look at them, then directed her gaze across the water. When their flashlight beams followed her line of sight, they saw it. Halfway across the swollen creek, a large fallen tree had created a temporary dam. Water rushed around and partly over it, but the tree was catching debris, branches, leaves, and something else. Something that moved. "Oh my God," Olivia gasped. "It's the cubs." Sure enough, Guardian's 2 cubs were trapped on the fallen tree, clinging desperately to the trunk as water surged around them. The tree was clearly shifting with each new surge of water. It wouldn't hold much longer. Guardian looked at the humans imploringly, then back at her stranded cubs. She paced the shoreline, clearly agitated but unable to reach her young without being swept away herself. "She led us here because she needs our help," Olivia said, her heart breaking for the frightened cubs. She remembered that humans helped before. Marcus was already shedding his backpack, pulling out a coil of rope. "I'm going to try to reach them," he said grimly, "but that tree could break loose any second." "It's too dangerous," Olivia protested. "We need more help." "There's no time," Marcus replied, knotting the rope around his waist and handing the other end to Olivia. "Secure this around that large oak and don't let go. If the current takes me, pull as hard as you can." Before Olivia could argue further, Marcus had waded into the rushing water. The current immediately tugged at his legs, threatening to pull him under, but he fought against it, moving carefully toward the fallen tree. Guardian watched intently from the shore, making soft, distressed sounds that were nearly lost in the storm. Olivia held the rope tightly, her knuckles white with strain, praying that Marcus would reach the cubs in time. The water was chest-deep by the time Marcus reached the tree. The cubs, seeing him approach, backed away fearfully along the trunk, moving dangerously close to where the tree disappeared completely under the surging water. "No, no, come back," Marcus called, though he knew the cubs couldn't understand him. He reached the tree and pulled himself up onto the trunk, trying to move slowly so as not to frighten the young bears further. Back on shore, Olivia gasped as she saw the tree shift ominously. "Marcus, it's moving!" Marcus felt the trunk lurch beneath him. The dam was beginning to break up. He had seconds, not minutes, to act. With no time for caution, he lunged forward along the tree trunk, managing to grab one of the cubs by the scruff of its neck. The young bear squirmed and cried out, but Marcus held firm, pulling it toward him. "One more," he shouted, though the storm nearly drowned his words. The second cub, seeing its sibling being taken, tried to retreat further, but there was nowhere left to go. The end of the tree was now completely submerged. With a heroic effort, Marcus stretched out along the tree trunk, his body half in the rushing water, and managed to catch the second cub's paw. The young bear, terrified, scratched and bit at him, but Marcus didn't let go. Inch by inch, he pulled both cubs toward him, cradling them against his chest despite their frightened struggles. Just as he secured both cubs, the tree gave a final, sickening lurch. The improvised dam was collapsing. Marcus had no time to climb back the way he had come. He had to jump. "Pull on the rope," he shouted to Olivia. "Now!" With both bear cubs clutched to his chest, Marcus leaped into the rushing water. The current immediately swept him downstream, but the rope around his waist pulled taut, preventing him from being carried away completely. Olivia, straining with all her might, began to pull him toward shore. On the bank, Guardian seemed to understand what was happening. To Olivia's astonishment, the mother bear gripped the rope in her powerful jaws and began to pull alongside her. The combined strength of woman and bear gradually drew Marcus and the cubs toward the shore. With a final tremendous effort, they pulled Marcus up onto the muddy bank. He collapsed on his knees, still holding the terrified cubs, water streaming from his clothes. Guardian approached cautiously, making soft sounds of concern. Marcus, understanding, gently set the cubs down. They immediately ran to their mother, pressing against her legs as she nuzzled and sniffed them, checking for injuries. The family reunion was so tender that Olivia felt tears mixing with the rain on her face. "You did it," she said to Marcus, helping him to his feet. "You saved them." Marcus winced, examining deep scratches on his arms where the panicked cubs had clawed him. "I think we all saved them," he said, looking at Guardian with newfound respect. She knew exactly what she was doing when she came to find us. Guardian raised her head, meeting Marcus's gaze directly. There seemed to be an understanding between them, an acknowledgement that transcended the usual boundaries between human and wild animal. Then, with a soft grunt to her cubs, she turned and began to lead them away, up toward higher, safer ground. "Wait," Olivia called after her. She fumbled in her pocket and pulled out a small object, a carved wooden bear that she'd purchased from a local artisan, intending it as a gift for Samuel. Instead, she placed it carefully on a rock where Guardian would see it. The mother bear paused, looking back. For a moment, the storm seemed to fade away, and there was only this connection, human and animal, united by an understanding deeper than language. Then, Guardian and her cubs disappeared into the stormy darkness. "We should get back," Marcus said, still breathing hard from his exertion. "Linda will be worried." The return journey seemed shorter, their steps quickened by the knowledge that they had succeeded in their mission. By the time they reached Linda's cottage, the worst of the storm had passed, though rain still fell steadily. Linda flung open the door as they approached, Samuel in her arms. "Thank God you're back." "What happened? You're bleeding, Marcus." As they stumbled inside, dripping water everywhere, they took turns explaining their extraordinary experience. Linda listened with wide eyes, unconsciously hugging Samuel tighter as the story unfolded. "She remembered," Linda whispered when they had finished. "She remembered that humans helped her baby, so she came to humans when her babies needed help." "Exactly," Olivia said, accepting a towel to dry her soaked hair. "It goes against everything we've been taught about wild animals, but Guardian is different. "She's special," Marcus agreed, wincing as Linda applied antiseptic to the cub scratches on his arms. "Just like Samuel is special." Samuel, seemingly aware that he was being discussed, looked up at the sound of his name. His bright eyes moved from face to face, taking in the adult's emotional expressions. Then, to everyone's surprise, he pointed at the window and said, "Clear as day. Bear?" Linda gasped. "That's his first real word. He's been babbling for months, but that's the first clear word he's said." "Bear?" Samuel repeated happily, still pointing. "Bear!" They all turned to look where he was pointing. Through the rain-streaked window, in the faint light of dawn that was now breaking through the clouds, a large silhouette was visible at the forest's edge. Guardian had followed them back, perhaps to ensure they reached safety, perhaps to say a final goodbye. As they watched, she rose briefly onto her hind legs, that same posture she had adopted when she first spotted Samuel on the tower ledge so long ago. Then she dropped back to all fours, her cubs appearing beside her, and the three bears melted once more into the forest that was their home. "Bear," Samuel said again, softer this time, a smile lighting up his face. Olivia knelt beside him, her heart full. "That's right, Samuel. Bear, your guardian angel." 2 years passed. The Samuel Fisher Wildlife Sanctuary became an internationally recognized center for bear conservation and research. Olivia's photographs and video documentation of Guardian and her family filled a best-selling book, with all proceeds going to support the sanctuary's work. Samuel grew into a curious, fearless preschooler with an extraordinary affinity for animals, especially bears. Linda had built a special viewing platform on their property, and on clear days, she and Samuel would spend hours there, watching for glimpses of Guardian and her now nearly grown cubs. Marcus Reed had expanded the sanctuary's educational programs, using Guardian's story to teach thousands of visitors about the complexity and intelligence of bears. He and Olivia had grown close through their shared experiences and commitment to protecting the special bear family, their friendship gradually deepening into something more. On the 5th anniversary of Samuel's rescue, a special ceremony was held at the base of the now stabilized tower. People had come from around the world to commemorate the extraordinary event. Linda stood at a small podium, Samuel by her side, addressing the gathered crowd. 5 years ago, in this very spot, my nephew's life was saved by an act of compassion that defied all our expectations, she said, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. That day changed how many of us see the natural world and our place in it. It reminded us that the capacity for empathy and understanding exists in places we might never have thought to look. Samuel, now a sturdy 6-year-old with his father's dark hair and his mother's bright eyes, stepped forward. He had been practicing his short speech for weeks. "I don't remember when the bear saved me," he said clearly, looking out at the assembled faces. "But I see her sometimes in the forest, and she sees me too. My Aunt Linda says she's my guardian angel. I think she's everyone's guardian angel, teaching us to be kind." A murmur of emotion rippled through the crowd. Near the back, Olivia discreetly wiped away a tear, and Marcus squeezed her hand. After the ceremony, as people mingled and shared their personal connections to the story, Olivia noticed Samuel slip away from the crowd. He walked to the edge of the clearing, looking intently into the forest. Concerned, she followed him. "Samuel, what are you doing, buddy? You know you're not supposed to go into the forest alone." Samuel turned to her, his expression serious beyond his years. "She's here," he said simply. "I can feel it." Olivia was about to gently redirect him back to the gathering when she felt it too. A presence, a watching awareness from the shadowed trees. She stood very still, and gradually her eyes adjusted to see what Samuel had somehow sensed immediately. Guardian stood just within the tree line, her massive form half concealed by the dappled forest shadows. Her cubs, now young adults themselves, were nowhere to be seen, perhaps having established their own territories as bears eventually do. "Hello," Samuel said softly, raising his hand in a small wave. "Thank you for saving me." The bear made no sound, but her intelligent eyes seemed to take in the scene. The tower with its commemorative plaque, the gathered humans, and especially the small boy who had once been a helpless infant in her protective embrace. Olivia knelt beside Samuel, putting an arm around his shoulders. "She remembers you," she whispered. "I'm sure of it." For a long moment, the three of them remained frozen in this tableau, the woman, the child, and the bear, who had brought them together in an extraordinary act of cross-species compassion. Then, with a dignified inclination of her massive head that seemed almost like a nod of acknowledgement, Guardian turned and disappeared into the heart of the sanctuary that now bore Samuel's name. "Will she come back?" Samuel asked, looking up at Olivia with wondering eyes. "I think she'll always be watching over you," Olivia replied, hugging him close. "Some connections never break, even when we can't see them." As they walked back to join the others, Samuel slipped his small hand into Olivia's. "I'm going to protect bears forever," he declared, with the absolute certainty only a child can possess. "Just like she protected me." Olivia smiled, knowing that Guardian's legacy would live on not just in this one child, but in all who had been touched by her story. The mother bear had done more than save a baby's life that day on the tower. She had reminded a cynical world that compassion knew no boundaries, that understanding could bridge the wildest divides, and that sometimes the most profound connections came from the most unexpected hearts. The story of the mother bear and the baby on the tower had indeed put everyone in tears, not just of sorrow for what might have been lost, but of wonder at what had been found. A universal language of care that transcended species, a reminder that in the end we were all simply living beings sharing one world, capable of recognizing need in each other's eyes and responding with what was best in ourselves. As the sun set over Pine Valley Forest, casting long shadows across the tower where it all began, Olivia thought she heard a distant, rumbling call. Guardian's voice, echoing through the trees. It sounded almost like a lullaby, a mother's reassurance that all was well, that her children, both bear and human, were safe under her watchful eye. 10 years after the Miraculous rescue, Samuel stood once again at the base of the tower. Now a thoughtful 16-year-old, he had grown tall and strong, with a quiet confidence and wisdom beyond his years. He came here every year on this day, the anniversary of when Guardian had saved his life, but this visit was different. In his hands he held an official letter, the culmination of years of dreams and determination. "I got in," he said softly to the empty air, knowing somehow that Guardian would hear. "The wildlife conservation program at the university. I'll be studying bear behavior and protection." His voice caught. "Because of you." The forest seemed to still around him, as if listening. Samuel unfolded a worn photograph, one of Olivia's best shots of Guardian standing protectively near the tower, her cubs at her side. He had carried this image with him everywhere since he was old enough to understand his extraordinary story. In the distance, a movement caught his eye. Samuel's breath stopped in his throat. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood an older bear, graying around the muzzle but still powerful, still regal. Guardian had become something of a legend. Few people spotted her these days, though researchers occasionally captured her on remote cameras, confirming she still roamed the sanctuary. "You knew I was here," Samuel whispered, tears filling his eyes. "You always know." Guardian watched him with those intelligent eyes, eyes that had once looked upon a helpless infant and made a decision that defied all natural instinct. She had been old for a wild bear even when she saved him. Now she was ancient by bear standards, a matriarch whose story had changed how an entire region viewed its relationship with wildlife. Samuel stood perfectly still, not wanting to shatter this precious moment. "I'm going to make sure no one ever forgets what you did," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm going to protect bears like you've protected me." As if in response, Guardian rose briefly onto her hind legs, that same pose from so long ago, before dropping back to all fours. Then, with a dignity that brought fresh tears to Samuel's eyes, she turned and began to walk slowly back into the forest. "Wait," Samuel called softly. From his pocket, he pulled out a small carved wooden bear, the very one Olivia had left for Guardian years ago during the flood rescue. It had been found months later, carried to a high cave that researchers later identified as one of Guardian's dens. Now, Samuel placed it once more on a flat stone near the forest's edge. "Thank you for my life," he whispered. Guardian paused, looking back one final time. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that transcended words, species, and time itself. Then she disappeared into the shadows of the forest that had become her protected home because of a single act of compassion. Samuel remained there until the last light faded from the sky, stars appearing one by one above the ancient tower. Somewhere in the distance, a chorus of wolf howls rose and fell, but Samuel felt no fear. This forest, once a place of danger for his parents, had become a sanctuary of healing because of one mother's extraordinary heart. As he finally turned to leave, he felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. His life had been saved by an act of love that crossed the boundaries of species, an act that had rippled outward to protect this forest and change countless human hearts. And though he knew that Guardian, now in the twilight of her long life, might not be there for his next visit, her legacy would continue, in the protected lands that bore his name, in the cubs and grandcubs that still roamed these woods, and in his own heart, forever marked by a mother's courage. "Goodbye," he whispered, one hand resting on the tower's ancient stones. "And thank you." The breeze seemed to answer him, carrying the scent of pine and earth and wild things. And though Samuel Fisher had no memory of the day Guardian had saved him from this very tower, he carried within him something far more precious than memory, a purpose born from the moment when a mother bear saw a lone baby on a tower and made a choice that put everyone in tears. As he walked back toward the lights of home, Samuel felt Guardian's presence all around him, in every rustling leaf and swaying branch. Some connections never die, even when separated by time and distance. Some love transcends every boundary we believe exists, and some stories, like the one that had shaped his life, continue to change the world long after their beginning, teaching us all what it truly means to see past differences and recognize the sacred bond that unites every living heart.